Welcome everyone, and thank you for listening in and watching our presentation from MHCLG and our team that have been working on many of our important design policies that are supporting the planning system in England. You're going to hear about a wide range of policy initiatives, but most importantly, the role of the National Design Guide, which outlines the key principles about good placemaking, good architecture, good landscape architecture, and the things that we bring together to create great places. And underneath the National Design Guide is the newly launched National Model Design Code. And the National Model Design Code takes things a step further. It outlines how local authorities, communities, developers can get around the table, talk to each other, and decide on what are the really important things for a scheme or an area of town or city or a part of a village. It sets a menu of issues that you will want to consider and perhaps develop policies for. It's a framework, it's a toolkit. I hope you find this video, the pictures and the words that have been carefully put together really helpful as you promote design quality, sustainability and beautiful places in your towns, your cities and your villages. Thanks very much for watching.
So thank you very much for that, Jenny. My name is Andy von Bradsky. I'm Head of Architecture at Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government. I work very closely in the Planning Directorate and have been leading on the design guidance and coding work. I'd like to give an introduction to our work on design guides and codes before handing over to Jane and David, who will take you through the detail. Our main focus in this presentation is on the National Model Design Code, which was recently published, and I'll be explaining what its purpose is, how it's to be applied in the system, how we engage with communities, and then I'll hand to David, who will take you through some of the coding principles and how it's applied in practice. And I'll be topping and tailing up with an explanation of the pilots and the training programme that we intend to do to follow that. So we've taken a very collaborative approach to forming these documents. We appointed Urbed and Tybbalds to work with us in a collaborative way. So we've co-created these documents between us. We've engaged very heavily with local planning authorities, with developers, consultants and experts in the sector. We've had an oversight of an advisory panel, and we've worked very closely with the emerging Office for Place organisation. Most importantly, I think, is the engagement that we've had across government on many of the issues which I'll talk more about with different government departments, and how we've engaged positively with the advisory bodies and professional institutes. As Jenny mentioned, there's a suite of documents now as planning practice guidance to support the NPPF Chapter 12, which is emphasising the importance of achieving well-designed places. That planning practice guidance includes a national design guide, which we will refer to shortly, and Jane will talk you through that. But the most important thing to realise in terms of the coding work is that this is a suite of documents that need to be read together as a whole. So with the design guide, National Design Guide, setting out the principles, the code providing how to apply those principles, and the guidance notes giving more detail on the application of detail in the coding. All these documents are material consideration in planning decisions and will inform plan making. Referring to the cross-government engagement that we've had, we've talked with DEFRA on the Environment Bill and on the emerging green infrastructure standards, so that is reflected in the guidance notes. You will be aware that Manual for Streets is being updated, and Department for Transport has engaged consultants to do that work. We have worked closely with Department for Transport to ensure that we have provided the ground rules for what Manual for Streets will say in more detail. We also bring into play all the government advice on climate change mitigation and adaptation, and even include reference to how design coding can support modern methods of construction. So these documents set out the design parameters that help local planning authorities and communities decide what good quality design looks like in their area. So design codes and guides have an objective effectively to be a framework for healthy, environmentally responsive, greener, sustainable and distinctive places. And our guidance notes give detail to how that can be achieved, building on the 10 characteristics of well-designed places, which Jane will run through with you in detail. They're to reflect the importance or the priorities of local circumstances, different context scales and types of development. Done well, these codes will give certainty to communities and certainty to developers and help speed up supply. Effectively, the National Model Design Code is a kit of parts, a toolkit, if you like to call it that, that help local planning authorities in particular in the production of design codes, also in the production of guides or policies that might be included in local plans. They help inform what design codes should be like and how they might be applied in the system, which would typically be an SPD approach. They set out methods of how to capture and reflect the views of the local community, and we will go through what's in the guidance notes in a bit more detail. And they provide effectively an overarching resource that planning authorities can use in planning decision making. So it's probably the best set of guidance notes published by government in recent years on design matters. How design coding is applied is going to be a matter for local authorities and local communities to determine. These could be area-wide, they could be local authority applied across the local authority. They could be applied to large-scale development sites, as is currently the case. But effectively, that is something for local circumstances to determine. And they need to be informed by an overarching design vision, an analysis of an area, and the objectives that the local planning authority sets out. And again, to emphasize the point, they need to be determined and applied locally. Returning to the point about community engagement, this is one of the most important aspects of the coding work. We have included within the guidance notes model approaches to community engagement to ensure that communities are involved in the development of design codes and that we do what we are committed to doing, which is bringing democracy forward in the planning system, in the plan making process. That requires genuine community engagement and requires the application of techniques of workshops, charrettes, walking audits, very typically face-to-face engagement, but probably needs to be much wider in the context of the pandemic, but also in the context of changing application of digital tools. So more digital approaches in terms of multiple engagement through social media, through the use of visualization tools and digital platforms. One of the most important things for community engagement is how we measure support at the end of that process. And we are looking for good examples of how you might achieve that. I now hand over to Jane, who will talk about the National Design Guide.
I'm Jane Dan. I'm a Director of Tybalt's Planning and Urban Design, and we worked collaboratively with MHCLG and the Design Council to prepare the National Design Guide. It was published by the government in October 2019, and it's recently been updated with some minor amendments in line with the draft National Design Code. The brief was for a visual guide to achieving well-designed places. So the focus was on all aspects of placemaking, not only the architecture of buildings or aesthetics. For the first time since we've had planning practice guidance, it shows people what good design looks like, not just describing it in words. It needed to identify the characteristics of well-designed places rather than telling people what to do or not to do, and to apply to all developments and places across England. The audience is local planning authority officers and councillors, applicants and their design teams, and local communities. The guide sets out 10 characteristics of well-designed places. It does this by topic, so we have 10 topics, each with a short phrase that sums up that characteristic. For example, we have context, enhances the surroundings, or movement, accessible and easy to move around. And the diagram really encapsulates our approach. A well-designed place has individual characteristics. They may be ordered in different ways by different users or to suit different situations. They aren't intended to be considered in isolation, but integrated together. And together, they contribute to 3 overarching objectives, which we've called the 3 Cs. They create its physical character, they nurture and sustain a sense of community, and they work to positively address environmental issues affecting the climate. The guide also identifies the different components for good design. All developments are made of these components put together in a particular way. The choices made in the design process contribute towards achieving the 10 characteristics, and they shape the qualities of a place. Good design comes about through making the right choices at all of these levels, starting with the layout, through form and scale, to appearance, landscape, and down to materials and detailing. And I'm now going to say a little bit more about the 10 characteristics, picking out a few highlights for each of them. Context is about enhancing the surroundings. The key points here are understanding and relating well to the site, together with its local and wider context. This means using baseline studies as a starting point for design. And the guide lists a broad range of possible considerations that might be relevant. The second point is valuing heritage, local history and culture. And this may include the significance of heritage assets, the typical characteristics of the local vernacular, or local cultural influences. An attractive and distinctive identity. Identity comes from the way that buildings, streets and spaces, landscape and infrastructure come together and how people experience them. It's not just about how a place looks, but how it engages with all the senses. This means responding positively to existing local character and identity. Where appropriate, creating new character and identity, recognizing that it isn't always the right thing to reflect what is existing at present. And also creating places and buildings that are well designed, high quality, and attractive so that they appeal and aim to delight us. For built form, the aim is to achieve a coherent pattern of development. That means a compact form of development, one that brings enough people together to support facilities and services and public transport. It also means appropriate building types and forms that are suited to the nature of the built form we're aiming to achieve. And it means creating destinations, places that bring people together that may include facilities and open spaces. So things like schools, community hubs, health, etc. Under movement, a well-designed place is accessible and easy to move around. In the updated guide, the content of this characteristic has been reorganized and the headings updated. So movement means a connected network of routes for all modes of transport, to give people the maximum choice for journeys, with a clear hierarchy of streets and other routes. Promoting active travel, and that's a new heading, around giving priority to pedestrians and cyclists and reducing reliance on the car. And thirdly, well-considered parking, servicing and utilities infrastructure for all users. The next characteristic is enhanced and optimized nature. Nature includes natural and designed landscapes, high-quality public open spaces, street trees and other trees, grass, planting and water. It's a much broader definition than just open spaces. And the key points here are providing high-quality green open space with a variety of landscape and activities, including play, and creating a green infrastructure system, improving and enhancing water management, including drainage and flood management, and supporting a rich and varied biodiversity to achieve net gains at neighbourhood, street and household level. Safe, social and inclusive public spaces includes both streets and other public spaces. And that means creating well-located, high-quality and attractive public spaces, open to all, and designed to include a wide range of activities for all their potential users. Providing well-designed spaces that are safe, including buildings around their edges, with active frontages and natural surveillance. And making sure that public spaces support social interaction through their siting, design, and the activities that they support. The next characteristic is mixed and integrated uses. The key points are a mix of uses. Sustainable places include a mix that supports everyday activity, including live, work, and play, and a mix of well-integrated home tenures, types, and sizes that reflect local housing need and market demand. And these provide a variety and choice of home to suit all needs and ages. In larger developments, this also includes a variety of development models, such as self or custom build, PRS, and community-led development. And finally here, promoting social inclusion. Functional, healthy and sustainable homes and other buildings means internal environments that are healthy, comfortable and safe. This includes being fit for purpose while also encouraging sustainable lifestyles. It also includes the standard and quality of internal spaces, particularly when you're talking about higher density developments. It's about homes that are well related to external amenity and public spaces. And it also highlights the importance of creating social spaces for residents, regardless of the tenure of their homes. And attention to detail in terms of storage, waste, servicing and utilities. Resources, efficient and resilient. This includes following the energy hierarchy to minimise the cost of running buildings so they're easy and affordable for residents to use and to manage. It's also about making sure places have a layout, form and mix of uses that reduces their resource requirements. And selecting materials and construction techniques carefully to reduce the environmental impact of new development and to create durable and adaptable places that reduce long-term resource needs. And thirdly, maximising resilience. That means using passive design strategies to achieve internal comfort, creating shade and shelter for outside spaces, and using green, sustainable drainage systems wherever possible. Lifespan, made to last. Key points here are that places are robust, easy to look after, and can age gracefully. They're designed and planned for long-term stewardship, with management and maintenance being considered from the early stages of the design process. Homes and gardens are designed to be adaptable so they can meet the changing needs of their users over time. And this includes changes in health and mobility, but also lifestyle changes as technologies evolve. And lastly, promoting a sense of ownership and belonging for occupants and communities, including community involvement in the design process. We know we're in a time of rapid change, and we can see that there's much more on the horizon, and some of the impacts are more predictable than others. It includes climate change, but also the aging population, changing expectations of younger people. Ownership models are evolving, with more renting and more communal arrangements and sharing. Technology and AI are continuing to change production, manufacturing and construction. And there's a move towards electric and self-driving vehicles and other forms of personal transport, including electric bikes and scooters. So for each characteristic, the guide includes a looking forward box. And this acts as a prompt. It asks a series of questions to encourage everybody involved in the development process to think ahead to how places and developments will fare as things change over time. For example, under movement, it identifies moving away from car use for short journeys, adapting to electric vehicles and their charging requirements, and also to driverless cars. And we know we already need to be thinking about how we can design places to adapt to these kinds of changes. And finally, I'd like to touch on the presentation of the guidance. It's been designed to be easy to understand and use, It's colour coded, so the different characteristics are easy to find. And also they're deliberately not numbered, as there's no natural order of priority. Each characteristic is illustrated and ends with a composite of good practice illustrations. We initially aimed for one image here, but swiftly realised it couldn't cover the variety of situations we wanted or needed to show as good practice. A key feature is the cross-referencing, both to other characteristics in the guide itself and to other chapters of the NPPF. These make it easy to relate the individual characteristics back to statements in national planning policy, both for planning applications and decision-making purposes. The National Design Guide is available for download from the gov.uk website. So I'd just like to encourage you all to make sure you're now using the updated version that's been published in January 2021. Thank you.
Hello, I'm David Rudlin. I'm director of URBED, and we're one of the principal authors of the National Urban Design Code, working very closely with MHCLG through the process that's set out within the National Model Design Code. And at that point, I'm going to share my screen. So the National Model Design Code is based upon a simple three-step process, and those steps are in turn broken down into sub-steps, given 7 in total. And what I want to do is just briefly go through each of these steps and describe how we anticipate local authorities would go about creating their local design codes. The first step is analysis, and this is the point at which you set up the basics for the code. The first issue that you'll need to address is the coverage of the code. Which parts of your area are you anticipating the code will cover? It can include the whole local authority area. That is a possibility. It may involve quite a lot of work, and so it's also perfectly acceptable for codes to cover just development sites, just areas where new development is planned, or perhaps a hybrid with some existing areas where change is expected and some development sites. The next question is about the coverage in terms of content. As Jane has indicated, the National Model Design Code follows the same 10-point structure of the National Design Guide, but it may well be that not all of those points need to be included in your design code. We would anticipate, I think, that movement, nature, built form, density, public spaces and uses would all be included in the code, but you may not, for example, wish to include anything to do with internal arrangements of homes in terms of housing standards. You may not wish to include sustainability measures or management issues, not because these things are not important, but because they're covered elsewhere in your policy agenda. So the codes may therefore just affect the external appearance and arrangements of new developments. The initial stage will also include the plan for consultation. As Andy has pointed out, this is crucial to the development of the code. It's important to understand how you're going to organise this, the techniques that you're going to use, and also perhaps to provide training for local community groups in terms of what a code is, what it can do, and how it is important for them to get involved. We then go on to stage 2. Looking at the baseline work that's going to inform the developments of the code. So here we're probably using the existing GIS base of the local authority to create a series of plans which will become important in terms of the developments of the code, particularly street hierarchy, the hierarchy of streets covering the area that the code will cover, but also open spaces, local facilities, schools, public transport routes, that type of thing, all of which are very relevant to elements of the code. So we come on to step 2. This is the section where we talk about the vision that the code is going to create. This is based upon the notion of area types, which is a term that we introduce in the code for the first time. Elsewhere, you might call this character areas or typologies, but area types essentially refers to areas of relatively consistent character in an urban area, which can be used to organise the way that the rules and the code is organised. Importantly, these area types, when we're thinking about them in terms of rules, we're not so much interested in what they are looking like now. We're interested in the vision we have for their future, how we wish the area to develop. So, for example, if you're looking at a suburban area where the local plan policy is to seek intensification, the code would reflect that intensification and would provide the rules to allow that to proceed. Having identified your area types, the key thing is then to map them. We need to know which bits of the district each area type covers. And on this plan, you'll see we have 10 notional area types, and these are purely suggestions, and we'd expect local authorities to develop their own, and they may be very different to these. But the sort of things that we've got here include urban neighbourhoods, inner and outer suburbs, district centres, town centres, and so on. These are the sort of areas that we anticipate area types covering. They're not use-based, they are character-based in terms of their designation, and you'd put them onto the plan so you could see which bits of the city or town fall into each area type. The map also includes dotted lines, as you'll see. These refer to development sites, and these are sites which have been allocated in the local plan. The code says nothing about where these sites should be or the sustainable location of them. That is entirely a matter for the local plan to deal with. The code picks up from the point when they've been allocated and will provide a framework for their development. So in order to do that, unlike the existing urban area, the development sites will need to be master planned. Now, of course, it may well be the case that the developer or the landowner for the site already has a well-developed master plan, and if the local authority is happy with that plan, then that plan can be incorporated directly into the code. If no plan exists, or if the authority wishes to coordinate between different owners, for example, then a new master plan or a developed master plan would be generated, and that could be done either by the local authority or in conjunction with the owner or developer. At the very least, I think it would set out the primary and secondary streets. It would talk about the open space allocation. It would talk about whether there's a local centre, and also crucially it would designate the area types, which is what the top right plan is doing there, showing which area types would apply to this particular site. This takes us on to step 3, which is the code, and this is in 2 parts. The first part are the bits of the code which vary by area type. Now, about half of the code, in fact, will be different depending on which area type you're in. Issues like building height, building frontage, building line, and so on. And they'll obviously be different in different types. So we use 3 examples in the coding just to show how this might work. Again, these are not exclusive, and they're just examples. So we have town centres, urban neighbourhoods, and suburbs, and the coding is then set out in this way. So we have a initial introductory paragraph which sets out the issue. We then have a set of potential policies or guidance, which could be used directly in local codes. And at the bottom of the page, there is then 3 examples about how that guidance would differ by the 3 different area types that we're using. And then on the right-hand side, there's a summary drawing showing what happens when you bring all this together. The coding, as it says, has 10 areas. One of them is a density. Obviously a very important issue in terms of the design of buildings. The code is very careful not to be architecturally specific. It is entirely neutral with regard to architectural style. It focuses instead on the principles of good buildings, which could apply whether it's a modern building or a traditional building. We also include some examples of what the actual numerical code rules might be. These again are for just purely illustrative, but we thought it useful to give an indication of the sort of measures that you'd expect to find in a code with relation to things like density, floor area ratio, party wall condition, and so on. And I think the key thing about local design codes is that they're clear, and they, where possible, have yes/no answers. And so it's very clear about whether a scheme is complying with code or not, trying to avoid subjective value-based rules and so on. We also include a whole range of building sections, street sections, sorry, looking at different types of streets and how they would be organised. This clearly overlaps with the Manual for Streets guidance, which is published separately. And we don't say a great deal about highway engineering or the way that the street is organised, but clearly from an urban perspective, from an urban design perspective, the width of the street with relation to the height of the buildings and the way that it's organised are very important. So we show examples of that. This then all comes together in two matrices, which are really important. The first one is the matrices which links the type of street, which you'll see down the left-hand side of this matrix, with the type of area, with the area types across the top. So clearly a high street in the centre of a town will be of different proportion to a high street in a suburb, and we showed the different enclosure ratios for each of those high streets. The second matrix is something which we are unable to fill in at the moment because this would be determined locally. But on the left-hand side now we have all the policies which which vary by area type, and across the top we have all the area types. And so the idea being that any developer will need all they need to do is determine which street they're on and which area type they're in, and they can use these two matrices to identify exactly which rules apply to their scheme and what the settings for those are. Final bit of the guide talks about area code-wide guidance. Now, these are things which don't really vary by area type. They include obviously things like sustainability issues, the standards with regard to housing development, but they also include very basic urban design things like the separation between public and private uses. And I say about half the rules in the code don't vary particularly by area type, and therefore would be applicable across the whole of the code area. And again, here's an example of a page which does that. This one covering nature with the initial summary of the issue, some suggested guidance, and then a summary diagram showing how it all comes together. And this is repeated for each of the 10 areas in the code. The guidance notes, as I've said, you'll have seen that on those pages in the code, there are lots of cross-references to elements in the guidance. It's quite a large document. It's attached to the main document, and it gives a lot more detailed guidance in a fairly graphic form about the way that the elements to the contents of the code might be shaped. It covers the same 10 areas, and it's structured in exactly the same way as the National Urban Design Guide, as Jane has talked about, and it looks like this. It's very visual. It takes the issues from the National Design Guide and adds another layer of detail, essentially looking at what that actually means in practice in terms of, in this case, creating good playgrounds or good quality public spaces. And these are just some examples of the guidance that's in the guidance notes for the different areas. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Andy von Bradsky to talk about the pilot programme.
So thank you very much for that, David. And I'd like to just set out what the next steps will be. Following the 8-week consultation on the NPPF changes and on the coding work, we'll be issuing a formal set of documents to apply in the current planning system. The testing programme, which we have launched as part of the design announcements, is seeking 10 local planning authorities to test aspects of the code work, each with some grant funding. And we expect to learn how these coding processes will work in different contexts around the country, whether it's in a central urban, suburban, urban, or rural setting. We want to test how the coding can be applied best in different applications of scale and of types of context. We will be commissioning a further 10 pilots in the spring when the coding work is formally launched, and we will be doing that in a way that leads to a local design code that is applied in the planning system. So taking it a step further and actually seeking pilots to apply it properly in the planning system. That is in the current planning system, so it's really important that we understand that this is for the current MPPF. We will obviously have some learning that will be applied to any reform planning system under our belt by the time we've undertaken the testing and the further pilots. That will give us a suite of documents that we can then use to help inform other local authorities about how they can apply design codes across the country. So that's a conclusion from me, and I'll now hand over to Joanna, who will say a few closing remarks.
So thank you very much for watching this video. We hope you found it really informative. You'll find lots more information on .gov.uk, where if you Google and put in the search engine National Model Design Code, National Planning Policy Framework, or the National Design Guide, you'll be able to see all the rich material. It's visually engaging. Please use it to apply to your policies, to your projects, to get around the table maybe with councillors or with your communities to talk about what design, good quality placemaking, good architecture, good landscape architecture, and actually how we deliver homes, neighbourhoods that meet today's challenges and tomorrow's challenges with the climate agenda, how we can really bring all those things together. Thanks for watching, and all the best. Bye.